Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Wednesday everybody. Today's episode is being filmed off-site. My apologies in advance for the audio quality. I hope it is not too distracting. First up, and briefly, this week Premier Li Qiang travelled to Jiangxi province for an inspection tour of flood control work. It's the rainy season in China and several parts of the country have been seeing floods. According to state media, Li stressed, quote, remaining alert to risks, strengthening preparedness and working unswervingly on flood control, disaster relief and rescue work to ensure the safety of the people's lives and property, as well as overall social stability. End quote. However, in a county in the central Chinese province of Hunan, a different one from where Li is currently, has been hit with the most severe flooding seen in 70 years after torrential storms, with local authorities declaring it a wartime emergency situation. Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post writes that the Miluo River, which flows through the Pingjiang County and eventually joins the Yangtze River, had reached 77.7 meters, 255 feet, by 12:30 a.m. on Tuesday. That was the highest water level recorded since 1954, and it exceeded the alert level by more than 7 meters. The county has recorded 759.6 millimeters, 29.9 inches of rainfall since June 18th, the highest for the period since 1961, when records began, the outlet added. On Tuesday, authorities upgraded the emergency response to disasters triggered by recent severe rainfall and flooding in central China's Hunan province to level 3. We will keep an eye on these developments, and if the situation continues to deteriorate, we'll have an update on the channel. Next up, it's increasingly looking like bankers are on the front line of the party's efforts to push so-called common prosperity in the private sector. US-based Bloomberg reports today, quote, one after another, bankers at China International Capital Corp are pledging their loyalty to the party. Hundreds are promising to follow the CCP's directives, guard its secrets, and, per the official oath, sacrifice my all for the party and the people. The outlet explains that the swelling ranks of badge-wearing communists at the CICC Bank, roughly a third of its bankers are now party members. Insiders say, quote, underscore the hard new realities for Wall Street-style capitalists in the China of Xi Jinping. End quote. Heeding Xi's call for common prosperity, the party criticism of financiers' hedonistic lifestyles, CICC, Bloomberg adds, has cast aside the hard-charging ways of Wall Street and its dream of one day challenging the giants of global finance. Quote, gone is the burning ambition, the long hours, the princely pay, so too is the steadfast belief that the markets rule. In their place has come a new playbook, one in which the party is paramount and vital to career success. End quote. Chen Zhiwu, a professor in finance at the University of Hong Kong, expressed on this change, quote, there has been a political redefinition of finance, end quote. Indeed, UK-based Reuters reports that China Construction Bank Corp, the nation's second-largest commercial bank by assets, has asked employees at its headquarters to take a pay cut of at least 10%. Higher-ranking officials will take a steeper cut in salaries, one of the sources told the outlet. While Chinese bankers cannot do much in the face of the political change of tide, international bankers can see the writing on the wall. In a piece published yesterday called Global Investment Banks Cut Jobs in China Retreat, UK-based The Financial Times writes that Western financial institutions in China have cut their investment banking workforce by the most in years, after a market slowdown hit profits and halted years of expansion in the country. Quote, the cuts in 2023 came as 5 of the 7 Chinese security units that are part of Wall Street and European banks either made a loss or reported tumbling profits, according to recently released annual reports. End quote. These 7 units employed 1,781 people last year, a fall of 13% from 2022. Next up, in what is quite a big deal, frankly, and strangely being underreported, in recent days, the Trade Minister of Indonesia, Southeast Asia's biggest economy, said their country will impose tariffs on China of 100 to 200% on imports ranging from footwear to ceramics, part of a plan to, quote, protect domestic industries, end quote. The trade minister told reporters over the weekend, quote, if we are flooded with imported goods, our micro, small and medium enterprises could collapse, end quote. adding that the trade conflict between China and the United States had prevented China from offloading its oversupply on many Western countries. This has led to a redirect of exports to other markets like Indonesia, threatening the country's smaller businesses with, quote, collapse, end quote. This does appear to be an example of a nation in the so-called Global South sharing the US and EU concerns about Chinese overcapacity. Others, like India and Brazil, have also followed suit in recent months. Duties will be imposed soon and could affect imports of footwear, clothing, textiles, cosmetics, and ceramics, the official said. Meanwhile, while we're on this theme, yesterday, Tuesday, Canada published options it could consider for deterring Chinese-made electric vehicles from accessing the Canadian market, including putting tariffs on imports and blocking Chinese investment in new Canadian factories. The paper was released as part of the formal consultations announced by the finance minister last week China must conduct before imposing tariffs. The consultation paper says that Canada's EV industry is, quote, at risk of being undermined by the significant recent increase in exports of Chinese EVs to the Canadian and global markets, enabled by unfair support through China's use of broad range and non-market policies and practices, end quote, adding that the Chinese policies include, quote, pervasive subsidization, including of the supply chains of necessary components, problematic or non-existent labor and environmental standards, and other measures to artificially lower production costs, which is leading to significant overcapacity in Chinese EV production, end quote. As we discussed last week, the vast majority of Canada's EV imports from China are Tesla Inc. vehicles produced in its Shanghai factory. We have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, if you can hit the like button, it's a huge help. Sharing and subscribing is a huge help too. 42% of regular viewers are not subscribed, and if we can get that below 40, that would be a great help. Thank you so much, everybody. Next up, in recent weeks we covered the knife attack against a Japanese woman and her child in Suzhou, which also saw the death of a Chinese woman protecting more children from being attacked. This was the second such attack against foreigners in the space of several weeks. Today, formerly based in Hong Kong, now US-based China Media Project published a piece called China Grapples with Nationalism and Fuels It, arguing that these events unleashed a torrent of xenophobic comments on Chinese social media, and that these attacks themselves are fueled by this discussion online. While it is difficult to conclude that these are linked, the argument is worth consideration. To end today's video, we will examine some of this piece, which we're now quoting selected excerpts from directly. In what Chinese state media portrayed as a full-scale effort to grapple with the problem of violent xenophobia, several platforms issued statements last week condemning the extreme nationalist comments users had left under news stories about the Suzhou attack. They included Weibo, Tencent, Phoenix Media, Baidu, and others. But this moment of supposed reflection ignored the deeper roots of extreme nationalism in the public discourse of the Chinese party state, which for years has nurtured a sense of nationalist outrage over the imagined slights of foreign countries, including Japan and the United States, and has turned the blind eye to extreme nationalist sentiment online. In a post on Weibo, former Global Times editor-in-chief and public opinion leader Hu Xijin dismissed the forces of extreme nationalism as fringe elements working against cool-headed international engagement. This suggestion by Hu Xijin and others that extreme nationalist voices are noisy exceptions shows an extreme lack of self-awareness at the exact moment we are being told that China is in the moment of self-reflection. A post from CMG Global News, an official account with more than 48 million followers, whips up fury over Japanese actions against China nearly a century ago, the very day many platforms released statements urging an end to language encouraging divisions between China and Japan. On June 30th, the day after Tencent's pledge to strike out against those inciting confrontation between Japan and China, China's flagship state broadcaster, CCTV, promoted a story on Weibo about Japan's use of counterfeit currency to destabilize China's economy ahead of its invasion in the 1930s. State media platforms may be feeling the heat over the recent outpouring of extreme nationalism, but the real lesson here is one of moral confusion, that nationalism is to be encouraged until it embarrasses the leadership. Here ends the direct quote and today's episode of China Update. I'd be interested to know what your views are on this final story, as well as the other developments we covered in today's episode. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Wednesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.